Dude, this AC is a game changer, though. So good.
The temperature. What is the temperature right now?
It do
Fine.
be hot.
It's 91. It's a perfect 91 right now.
Oof. I think it's like 86 here. Our humidity is like probably in the high 70s right now.
So we've
Oh,
got super low humidity. So like the dry heat is dehydrating, but it's not horrible to exist in.
right. Anyways, welcome to Omnia Obscurium, where we're talking about our home temperatures because that's what we do.
Apparently, this is about old hardware,
Uh-huh.
and the benefits of buying and using old hardware.
Which you should do.
Yeah.
And you should recycle bad old hardware, not throw it out.
So this is an argument I made for years, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
built so many old ass PCs just for the thrill of putting together something strange and exciting. And I can attest to the value of old hardware as it stands today. I daily drive a rigged together all-in-one PC from 12 years ago with an i7 860. It can fit 32 gigabytes of RAM and supports it.
Mm-hmm.
And it has an eGPU coming out of the mini PCIe slot. It runs just about everything. It's beautiful to look at, and it's 12 years old. I can't stress that enough. The fact that it runs as well as it does is incredible.
Well, I think a lot of people don't know about eGPUs or even know what that means. So why don't we start there?
eGPUs are the most incredible technology I have ever seen in my life. And I'm not talking about those garbage little Thunderbolt eGPUs that don't perform up to spec and seriously cut back GPU performance. I'm talking about DIY EXP GDC B stock eGPUs that
That's a lot of words.
you put your own graphics. It's a lot of letters. You put your own graphics card on these docks and you wire them into an express card, a mini PCIe slot, or an M.2 slot, and you get the benefits of using your PCI Express lanes directly. The whole thing is an ingenious idea that keeps hardware alive. It's one of the only reasons to buy an old laptop with an express card. Uh, you've probably never heard of an express card before, and if you haven't, looking
God
into it might
world.
be valuable. You might actually come across something you already have that has that slot on it,
If
which is huge if you do.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but now they're using USB-C and USB 3.1 for those. Like it's
So
even more accessible.
those are Thunderbolt ports. I think it's accessible. It's not the greatest idea. They're expensive. I think the EXPs that use Express Card or M.2 or even the MPCIe, the mini PCIe, the Wi-Fi card slot, if you don't know what it is, those work phenomenally. That's what I daily drive is a mini PCIe just plugged into where the Wi-Fi card used to be, and I replaced it with a 5 gigahertz Linksys USB.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
I don't care for Thunderbolt port eGPUs very much, but DIY eGPUs, if you're willing to put the time and effort into learning how it works, and you have a spare monitor, and you've got the desk space and the want to do it, it needs its own power supply, that which is kind of inconvenient, but all in all, taking something extremely old or extremely cheap and spending $80 on the dock and the supply, it's not all that expensive to do that in comparison with buying a whole ass new PC, or even an old office PC is more expensive by the numbers.
Yeah, by the numbers, definitely trying to get your hands on something like a Newegg, old stock rebuild or something like that is gonna still run you into the $600 range, at the high end. But I mean, if you're repurposing something like an old office PC and it has like an ATX case, maybe a mini ATX case or mid ATX rather, tossing in like a low profile card that doesn't require an upgrade to your power supply is still going to
Right.
be very useful.
You can get those old office PCs for still anywhere from like 60 to $100. Put in 1660 low profile, even something like super cheap like a 1030, 1050 low profile that doesn't need more than maybe a 6-pin power if it needs a power cord at all,
Right.
and it's a great way to go.
I don't know if I could recommend a 1030 though, personally. They are great for emulation.
You need
Phenomenal
to look
for
at
emulations.
1030s are about which model you buy. If you're getting a GDDR5 model, they're fantastic. But if you're just getting like a DDR3 model, it's not great.
So you want to look at like GDDR5 and GDDR6 models?
Yeah,
Got you.
the three models are just bad. You can read what the memory spec is on the website that you buy them from. Always check the memory spec to make sure that you're buying modern memory and it's not a DDR3 card, because you'll end up with speed that you wouldn't believe. It's ungodly slow, slower than integrated graphics.
That's not good at all. Like UHD graphics
Yeah,
or oh
it's kind of worse than
the
early integrated graphics too. Uh, the original Core i series integrated graphics were a little bit better than the performance you get out of a GT 1030.
oof. Well, when I'm working with a client and they are like, "Oh, I don't have a lot of money. I want a decent PC, but I'm just like introducing into PC." Typically, I try to avoid things like DDR2, obviously. It's a little
Yeah.
out of date for somebody getting into gaming.
Now, Now, if you already have a DDR2 laptop or PC, by all means, just buying a cheap graphics card, even a cheap 1030, is a huge leap forward for that PC. You can
Mm-hmm.
install a Linux and actually make it video playback viable, program viable. It'll be usable at the very least.
What Linux do you prefer?
Some really good ones are Mint. Mint is the great starting point for everybody. That's everybody's first Linux because it replicates Windows. It's a really similar environment.
That's the one I
Ubuntu's come a
use.
long way, very long developed, worth using. MX Linux is incredibly tiny. It's like Linux Lite and MX Linux are very similar in that they're incredibly tiny, made for old hardware. When you're looking up Linux distros, it's important to look up what's compatible with the hardware you're installing it on. Something not a lot of people who recommend Linux mention is that not every distro is compatible with all hardware. So you kind of have to go back in time a little bit sometimes and look for older releases of some of them.
It's good that you remembered to reference that because I always forget that.
Yeah, everybody always forgets that, but it's a super important detail. You need to know what version of Linux is compatible with the hardware you're trying to install it on, or you'll end up with all kinds of problems. I guarantee no matter what distro you're looking for, you'll find a version that's compatible with your hardware, but you need to make sure that you're actually getting that version. Otherwise, you'll have a ton of problems.
Right. Because as going back to what I was saying, I typically try to avoid LGA 775. Like,
It's too old. Single core Pentiums, long out of date. Single core CPUs in general are a no-go anymore.
right. Like the Core
Dual
2
core and
quad.
above.
Core 2 quad. It's a phenomenal CPU. You can pick them up for 25 bucks. It seems like a very good deal until you try to use it. No hyper threading. The PCIe bus lanes aren't very good. The RAM support isn't very good.
Right.
They're historical. They're iconic. I own one. It's phenomenal. But you kind of want to look, and this is where I tend to get in trouble with people. I say Gen 5 Intel is like where you
I
want to be looking.
honestly, you want my personal opinion is that you need to be at like an Intel. If you want to play literally everything 100% of the time and have no falter playing anything at all, an AMD FX 6000 series or Intel Core i3 3000 series and above.
So you're saying
Like,
third gen.
yeah, third gen is probably the best place to start. If you're just looking for like super low end, but you want to you can still play a large variety of things, but like you're going to be missing out on AVX instruction set games. The first generation Core I's are like $20.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get a Core i7 860 for $20, get 16 gigabytes of RAM, slap that in there. That's all $40 together.
Mm-hmm.
Cheap ass motherboard for $30, $100 PC.
Right. Just throw it in a whatever, you know.
Whatever case with a whatever power supply.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be adding something like a full card, like a 1070, you're going to want to have a decent PCU. But right now, you can get EVGA PSUs 750 watts for like 60 bucks. They're literally a drop in the bucket.
Right. I happened to come across a Goodwill power supply that was sealed and in its box a 750 watt that I bought for $20 to replace one of the old Hercules power supplies that I bought. That was like $30.
And Hercules is pretty old.
Yeah, they're pretty old. I had a couple of 500-watt power supplies with 6 pins that I was using to run the 750 Ti in the eGPU dock for a while.
Right.
I replaced that with something better with an 8 pin, got a 5 RX 560, and kind of upped that a little bit to make it more usable and daily drivable.
Those 560s are great if you're just looking for
It
a
is
very basic gaming PC.
It is. The one I bought is not. I bought an XFX single fan 564 gigabyte, and if you don't know, it's literally their 460 with a 560 V BIOS, and they don't have any modifications really to fix that. So a lot of the power settings are fucked up, and it doesn't run to its full potential because of just how that is.
Oh.
It took a little bit of setup for me to actually get it to run appropriately.
When I'm usually working with a client who's like heavily on a budget, typically my lowest I'll go is $300, right?
Right.
And right now you can hardly even find a GPU for under $300. Like when I sent you that link to that 16, what was it, 1660 Max Q or OC for under $300, I was like, "Oh, that's actually a pretty good deal." But like price to performance, it's really not. It's just the
I,
market landscape we're in currently at the time of recording.
You will not have a great experience with anything under 3 gigabytes of VRAM these
Oh,
days.
absolutely
It's
not.
just, but even if you're like looking for something just to handle like emulators, and that is where you want to start, and you're totally okay with that, you're fine going super, super cheap. 1 gigabyte and 2 gigabyte cards are still pretty viable. You know, you can get the 650 Ti's and 750 Ti's for pretty cheap.
Yeah. Even like a 570 or something like that, or a
Right.
470 if you want to just
The old,
have a little extra room.
right. There's a they drew a lot of power, so you need like dual 6 pin for some of them. You need to make sure that you're getting one that actually is viable to use before you get it,
Yeah,
which is a big deal. Like I bought EVGA 560, 570, 580 for collection purposes, not because I ever intended to use them. They
it's
they draw
archival.
so much power.
Yeah, it's important when you're doing GPU research to always look at the TDP and what wattage it's going to be pulling at. Because say you're just upgrading a whatever Optiplex that you have lying around with like an i3 Gen 3 and you want to throw like a 1070 in it. Well, sure, it should work with that motherboard, but when it comes to the power
You
supply,
never want it to pull more power than the
yeah,
CPU is or the RAM are pulling. You never want it to pull more power than your VRMs or your MOSFETs are pulling. You know, there are so many things on the board pulling power into different places all the time that interfere with that flow of power and get interfered with when you have a GPU. So like paying really good attention to the wattage is important. I I I agree.
just recently ran into that issue. Somebody in Florida contacted me for some IT work, and I don't often talk about my work. I just mention I do it. Um, and he had a Generation 5 Intel i7, but it was one of the ones that do like 165 watt TDP CPU.
Ouch.
And he was wondering why, when he installed his 2080 Super, he was just crashing constantly. But when he used his 1070, it was perfectly fine. Well, he only had a 650 watt PSU. So he was completely over throttling his power supply.
Yeah,
Not
that
good.
not getting power to everything evenly and just like there, I imagine things were like struggling and shorting amongst themselves, kind of.
Yeah. Just completely power deprived.
You wouldn't think so, but that can kind of cause some physical hardware damage if you're a little bit too careless about like how you draw power and over pulling way too much power from a power supply is exactly how you short a power supply.
And you do not want to have a capacitor pop inside of a power supply. It is loud, it is scary, and
It
it can
can
also
catch
cause a
fire.
fire. Yep.
Yeah, it's always worth remembering that wattage matters. Your CPU might be pretty old, and if it is, it's got a thick wattage, thick
Mm-hmm.
with like 5 Cs.
Which it doesn't have to be a scary thought. Like if we're talking about recycling parts, and you're like, oh, well, I can get a i3 fifth gen for what do you think, like 30, $40 right now on
Yeah.
eBay. Don't be afraid of like those TDPs. Just recognize that, okay, I might not be able to use a proprietary motherboard. So if you're upgrading something that's just been laying around, just real quick, just do some research, see what motherboards you can put that chip on and move everything
You
over.
can get you can get an i3 3240 for $12.
Yeah.
$10 used, right? Like super used, where you can see that it's out of a plastic casing, it's been marked on.
Yeah.
There's one here for $5 that's got a couple of marker things, probably pulled from some kind of charity benefit, some recycling or something.
Or just some
And
dude's bench PC.
I recommend LGA 1155. I'm a huge proponent of that series of motherboard. The chipset that
Same.
goes with the 3000 series is pretty good. You get PCI 3, you get gigabit Ethernet, you get the benefits of USB 3.0 to a certain degree.
And there's always PCIe adding cards that give you USB 3.0, so
Right.
don't be afraid of using that.
I was running VR with my first generation i7 build with the weird motherboard that had the World of Tanks box. I got to tell this story. I was building a computer to replace one that I had bought and built with a generic motherboard already. It was an LG 1155 or 1157
Oh.
that was unbranded and super weird, and the only branding on the box was this like blue shield that didn't make any sense or have any logo or name on it or anything. It was just a blue shield. It was the strangest thing. And I bought another one to replace it. And this time, the whole box was covered in a World of Warships advertisement. And the blue shield actually had a name and a brand with it. And it said motherboard sprawled in big letters across the front of the thing. It was just such a trip to look at this weird off brand generic motherboard with this huge advertisement for a well known game on the front of it.
It's so bizarre. Um, to add to your reasoning of loving the LGA 1155 is also that you can go to Amazon and they have readily available supercoolers for them. You can get water blocks, you can get AIOs, you can get massive hyper evos, all kinds of stuff. And if you're on a budget and you just want to supercool that thing, $20 you can get one of those big radiator coolers for it. So that's a really good recommendation, honestly. The LGA 1155. What GPU would you pair with that kind of system,
At
personally?
maximum, probably like a 1660 Super. Uh, I think like prime budget gaming, if you were going to go at the bare minimum right now, a 564 gigabyte is the way to go. An RX 564 gigabyte is
Yeah.
like the perfect pairing to go with this hardware configuration. It's low end. There's not a huge bottleneck. It'll run a ton of games because it doesn't have huge memory limitation. You won't be able to run everything at perfect performance, but if like you're just trying to play Valorant, or you're just trying to play some shit like, the new Forza came out. I play Halo Infinite on my RX 570. There's not much of a memory limit. The compute's pretty good. I'd recommend the 564 gigabytes. They're pretty good.
You can pick those up for what, like $80?
Yeah, and if you get a single fan one like I got, the power issue is an issue, but it also has the benefit of only needing a single 6-pin. Like it's one of the last single 6-pin GPUs out there.
And they
It's super lightweight.
right. They also have the LP cards, which are only 65-watt PCIe powered.
Right,
I mean,
right.
sure,
Those
you're
are
gonna cut
incredibly
back
low
your
power.
performance because your megahertz will be down a little bit, just because it doesn't have the electricity to convert into translation.
But the
But
cards themselves are already undervolted and clocked upward
exactly.
from that, so they're performing to really good capacity despite having that bit of a cutoff.
And again, we're not talking about 1080p, 122 FPS competitive.
Right. This isn't some fucking Linus Tech Tips exotic build. These are like the super budget options where you're digging back into the way past to find something that works,
Right.
something that'll do what you want it to do.
So, because I feel like we're in this culture of people finally switching over to PC, in my opinion, finally switching over to PC. As you know, I'm not a big fan of consoles. But
Right.
as I've talked to people about getting into PCs, they're so focused on like, well, I need to be on the 12700K and I need to have a 3080, and I'm just like, have you ever played a PC before? Do you have any idea what you're talking about? Like, no, you don't need that. Like, even in
You
argument, I don't even need it.
right now, as it stands, even the lowest end NVIDIA option is extreme overkill for a PC. Like that is way above and beyond what the average person needs or will use for the next couple of years at the very least.
Right.
I'd say Stalker 2 is the one game that breaks any of these rules. It needs a 2070 minimum, is what they said supposedly. I don't believe it, but we'll see when it gets here.
Well, we're also way more into optimizing and organizing and
Right.
casing our PCs. So our PCs typically run a lot better than your average PC.
See, I am kind of giving advice. I am giving advice on hardware generally, but I'm kind of giving advice also on like based on my experience after I've optimized games to run on my
Right.
PCs as they are. You know, every things that run at medium or low or high settings, that really makes a huge difference. In a lot of games on the all-in-one with the eGPU, I have to go into config files, manually change renderers, change a lot of anti-aliasing that doesn't get turned off, kind of mess with things a little bit more in depth and optimize because like balancing out the weight of compute and graphics at the same time is really hard. And one bottlenecks the other because of the lane difference. So there's kind
Right.
of an issue there. So like shadows and textures work really well in a lot of cases, but anti-aliasing won't,
Mm-hmm.
or otherwise anti-aliasing needs to be turned on and otherwise for the compute to
Well,
actually run to full capacity.
I don't think people fully understand that anti-aliasing is a rather new thing. Like that, I mean, it's been around for a hot minute, but I don't remember seeing anti-aliasing until probably 2 years into the Xbox 360 release.
The original Xbox had anti-aliasing. That was the big kick to buying San Andreas on it, was the larger draw distance and the anti-alias models. But
Right.
that's all FXAA. That's extremely old anti-aliasing. That is the original form of anti-aliasing that we came to know and love with PCI Express.
Got you. Okay, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. Well, yeah, because Microsoft, it's called the Xbox because of DirectX, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. Super fascinating. Technology is awesome. I want people to understand that because I'm looking everything from a price to frame kind of perspective, as I typically do.
Right.
That if you're spending $12 on an i3 third gen and you're spending, let's say, 220 bucks, you get a 1660 low profile card. It's going to be what, maybe 100 watts overall.
Yeah, it's not going to be very heavy.
You throw in a 500-watt upgrade, maybe an aftermarket motherboard, and you just swap over some old DDR3 that you have lying around or something, you get 16 gigabytes. I mean, as long as that RAM's running at above like 2444 these days, which is very doable with DDR3. I mean, 1888 even is a solid argument that that's a solid speed. That
I run
PC is going to be perfectly fine.
I run 20 gigabytes of DDR3 1600 in the all-in-one.
There you
And
go.
it's a little bit awkward in chip layout, but because the 2 gigabyte sticks and the 8 gigabyte stick, or the 4 gigabyte stick and the 8 gigabyte sticks work in tandem together with the same cat task speed and things like that, it all balances itself out. They don't bottleneck each other.
Well, not a lot of people know what CAS speeds are and things like that, but
Right.
essentially it's a timing controller within the PC. It's the
Right.
easiest way
When
to put it.
you can mix and match RAM all you want as long as the timings and speeds are the same.
Typically, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
'Cause
They'll be compatible as long as the timing, speeds, and chipsets are the same. Even having different chipsets will work in most cases. Like they won't cooperate great, but they'll work.
yeah, like so if you're using like Corsair that pulled it from one location, then a Hynix,
Right.
which made it in-house, it should still work as long as the timings and megahertz are the
Right.
same.
If you're buying DDR3, huge shout outs to A Data. I actually really appreciate the
Same.
amount of work in the brand new DDR3 that makes it out to market. It's impressive as shit.
Just make sure your motherboard supports it before you buy it. Always double
Right.
check your motherboard specs with DDR3.
Know what RAM slots you're sticking RAM in, otherwise you could break them. Don't
Always
put
run
RAM,
dual channel.
not a RAM. Always run dual channel. A single RAM slot without that second channel filled will absolutely kill your performance.
A lot of people make that mistake. I very often am working with clients where they're like, "Oh, but I bought this Corsair Dominator 16 gigabyte stick," and I'm like, "Did you buy two of them?" And they're like, "No," and I'm like, "Well, that's why you're getting so much frame drop. You're
Yeah,
just
you've got all
completely
this
filling that
RAM.
bus."
You've got all this RAM working by itself with nothing to offload onto. So there's nothing, it's not, yeah, I mean, it's so stressed all at once in one place. Nothing is moving with multi instruction at the same time. Like you're
Right.
not, you need to be able to fill up both of those pieces of RAM at the same time.
Because
Otherwise,
it's
you're
not
just
like filling
fucked.
a glass of water, and that's what I use this example quite frequently. RAM is not like filling a glass of water. I mean, you have a spigot, you turn it on, it can only flow so fast. And the cup can only fill so fast, but if you split the load between multiple cups, you can pour it out faster. And your CPU is going to accept that water a lot faster if it's coming from multiple locations. Your CPU will always outpace your RAM,
Right.
especially with hyper-threading, especially with all these new things that they're coming out with. You
We have
need to have
AMD
multiple.
access memory is a huge deal
Mm-hmm.
these days. AMD is proprietary with CPU and RAM compatibility. If you have like a 6600 XT or above, you can use smart access memory, which is massive. You won't, this isn't about something high end like that. I really want AMD to bring that capability to older shit like the RX 570 could benefit so massively from smart access memory. I'm not even, I would see such a huge performance benefit if I had that.
Same thing if they figure out HBM, but that's all. That's some super high end conversations. HBM is like exotic RAM.
Right. Normally, in most cases, I make the argument that manufacturers could inherently produce the older form of the product that people enjoy. But in the case of silicon-based products, I can't say that. The
Right.
old hardware that we have is here to stay. It is what it is. And we're not going to get much new manufactured out of those things.
And
Like
that's why
they've run their life.
I mean I just talked the job I work at into getting recycling boxes for old phones and old tech and stuff like that. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff that people come through and drop off. Old laptops, like just
Totally
insane.
working shit that they replaced because they think it's too old to use and never even bothered to open or turn on.
Right. Just
Untested
super.
hardware.
And it's like it's not like I can legally take it because it's being recycled. It's not my product. I don't own it. I don't know what's on it. So it sucks because
But you know what?
it is what it
You
is.
as the consumer out there can go and buy these fucking recycled items for dirt cheap in your small local PC shops. We have one, and they were nice as hell to me. Gave me a SATA cable when I needed it without me even needing to pay for it. They were super nice. Go support your local PC shop.
Oh
Find a
yeah.
brick and mortar computer store. They could really use the support. If you're into old hardware, they will sell you good old hardware at a very, very cheap price without shipping. Everything's really, really nice when you get to look at what's in front of you and you can have a better understanding of what you're buying.
And they're really good about like showing you what they're talking about because they're so passionate about what they do.
Right. That's why they still run and operate a local PC store. It's
Mm-hmm.
they don't pull in a shit ton of money. The money they do pull in goes to keeping them alive because they care about what they do.
Right. I love tinkering with old hardware because it's so easy and accessible. Like I can just jump on eBay. I can throw together, a DDR3, Gen 4, Gen 5, Gen 6 desktop and it won't break the bank. And then I can sit on that, find a decent GPU, benchmark it, see how it does, and then when I'm bored of it, I can just throw it up on Facebook Market and typically just get my money back. Like I'm not even making a profit on it at this point because it's just fun to do.
Yeah. Computers are fun, really. If you give yourself the time to learn, it's not too hard to understand. You'll get to experiment with different things and try new things, and it takes a long time, but like what's more fun? Sitting and staring at the same thing forever, like your cell phone or a wall or a game that you play, or getting your hands in something and working on a project and actually feeling like you're accomplishing something.
Accomplishing something.
Exact 100% of the time, accomplishing something is very satisfying.
There's nothing better than when I make a mistake after like my 300th PC build, and I'm like, huh, why did this go wrong? And I learned something new about BIOSes, or I learned something new about
And it
voltages.
always changes. There's always something new to learn there because there are always different issues and things to solve. Every PC is so unique to itself when you build it.
Oh yeah, it's all personalized. I had a Ryzen, not Ryzen. It was a LGA 1155 i5, what is it? 3570K? Is that it?
Right.
I water blocked it and I put it on 2 liters of water. So I just was like, "Hey, I have this broken AIO. I'm going to take this soda bottle and seal it and run 2 liters of water over this." Sorry, it was so funny. I should have taken a picture of it. Um and I posted a picture of it on, where was it? I think it was just on my Facebook. Dude, people were like, "I want that. Give it to me. How much do you want for that computer?" It was just like, I have a couple barbs laying around. I was learning custom water loops. Here's a $10 PC where if these components break, I'm just gonna take it to the recycling bin anyways. And
Water
people are
cooling's
offering
dope. You
money.
can still you can do that pretty cheap, all things considered now.
Hmm.
Water cooling has become a really cheap solution. As we haven't really talked much about cooling, I'm on the end where like if you have an Optiplex and the case is built into the fan is built into the case, that kind of sucks. I'm really sorry about that. But if you don't have an Optiplex, just buy a Hyper 212.
Yes, buy a Hyper 212. Game
They're
changer. Game changer.
It they're kinda big, they're kinda bulky, but they're ridiculously cheap. They're super great cooling devices. They keep your shit cold. They don't require too much maintenance. Once every 6 months, I clean mine, and it looks really good.
And don't pull an Ian and go spend $220 for your Arctic cooler and another
No,
$300 for your Noctua system. You don't
no,
need
don't do
it.
that.
You don't need it. I
You
am
don't.
extreme into the PC space. I am not your average consumer.
Right,
Please understand.
you buy water cooling if you intend to overclock, and if you're very manipulative with your PC hardware, you intend to push it a little bit hard, you're constantly stressing it, or you run it in an incredibly hot environment.
I only I only typically recommend water cooling to people who switch their games a lot or turn their PC off a lot. Just
Right.
for thermal shock. That's it.
Pro tip, don't turn your PC off a lot.
Don't
Don't
do
do
that.
that.
Bad.
Yeah, kinda leave it on, let it do its thing. Let Windows turn your PC off once in a while when it needs to update, and when it's booted back up, it's during inactive hours, so you won't even notice it.
Also, turning your PC off takes all the heat off of your chip. And if you don't know, thermal shock is when metal expands and
Right.
compresses from different temperature fluctuations. Keeping it at a steady temperature is actually healthier for your PC.
Yeah, not only with the metal, but with the silicon itself as
Hmm.
well. You're gonna end up with tiny stress fractures that build up gradually over time from that constant heat shifting that's going on from turning on and off your PC. Not only that, there's the problem with like constantly reading from your disk being an issue and having to boot and do all of those sequential reads all at the exact same time is incredibly hard on your power supply, your PC itself, your hard drives, just whatever you might be pulling at the beginning when your PC is booting. It's
Hmm.
unhealthy for the whole thing.
Not only that, but your fans, they typically run better with consistent power. So just letting them spin at their lowest RPM is actually better for them, and it keeps them lubricated because
You
the
want
oil within it's actually going to stay
you
lubricated.
want like a good fan curve that builds with temperature and doesn't go too overboard.
Which typically a good PWM fan controller will do for you. Those are cheap.
Right.
You can pick those up for like $12 nowadays, but they used
Uh,
to
The
be like
maximum
100.
uh the maximum my GPU fan blows is 80 RPM, and I mean like or 80 ticks, so 240 RPM, so it's not running incredibly fast.
That
It's
sounds
just
slow, but I believe it might be 2,400. But I don't, that even sounds way too fast. I don't know.
I think I'm pretty
I'm
sure
not
it's
good
only
with
running at like
RPM.
it's a dual fan, so I'm pretty sure they're only running at like 240 RPM. They're small fans.
Like I said, I don't know RPM all that well. I water cool. Sorry, I don't have much to add to that.
That's all
You're my
irrelevant
air
to the
guy. I
conversation.
trust you when it comes to air stuff because I
Yeah.
don't do air.
You want the case, you want the fan on the back of your case pointed out, exhausting air outward. You want the fan on your CPU cooler blowing air toward that fan at the back of your case so it exhausts outward. You want your graphics card also exhausting outward and out of the top so it'll all pull out of that back area. And it's good to have a fan at the front of the case or on the top of the case near the front, pushing air downward toward that first fan so it's getting cold air constantly, airflow running through that heat sink, constantly cooling the heat pipes.
You know my PC runs backwards to that.
Really?
Yeah,
You exhaust air upward?
my exhaust is my radiator in the front. So my PC exhausts out the front. I
Heat
intake.
rises.
Yes, I know. I have 4 fans pulling air through my radiator out the front.
So it's like cooling it on its way out.
Yeah, it's.
Okay. Because with my air cooler, heat rises. I want to prevent that heat from hitting the
Mhm.
roof for as long as possible because it will start to heat up the room and the environment around it. Exhausting out of the back keeps it at a low level and makes sure that that heat rises slowly instead of like all just
Yeah.
shooting up toward the roof.
For most purposes, that is 100% accurate. It just so happens that my PC, it needs to be reversed just because
Right.
of its layout and its configuration. I'm running, God, 14 fans.
Oh my God. I've only got 3.
Yeah. There's also a huge difference between your PC and mine.
Yeah, I'm running a not heavy wattage chip, a kind of decently watted graphics card. Everything's pretty cold.
Mhm. Your
It's
PC
also
runs
90
great.
degrees here, though.
Yeah. And if but you don't have the humidity, so it's like you have that
Right.
dry heat, so you're not so conformed
I
to
can leave I can leave the
condensation.
front panel off of my PC and point a fan at it because I'm confident the moisture won't build up and cause a crash.
I want people to understand why my PC has 12 fans, if you don't mind letting me go in detail real quick.
Yeah,
Okay, so I have a 12700K, which is the third fastest CPU for consumer market right now, I believe. I believe the 12900K is the only thing that's really beating it out, and the 12700KS. And I have a 3080 Ti that's overclocked, right? So you're probably already like, oh, that's a lot. Like that's a lot, right?
right,
So I'm also running a 1200 watt power supply that's also running a 22 terabyte NAS. So in my
right,
office, I have my computer, which is running a supercomputer. On top of that, it's running a NAS, which is a network attached storage for people who don't know. So it's 22 terabytes of accessible data for game storage, video storage, rendering, things like that. So if I have to offload something, I can offload it to the NAS. And then inside of my computer is another computer. So I have a micro PC, which is just a old Intel Atom PC that runs and connects to a PCIe port that bridges to a Elgato capture card for when I stream, it does some of the offloading of the NVENC onto an Elgato capture card, which already has a processor built into it for capturing HDMI video. So I can output through my GPU into a it's a lot, right?
That's your daisy. You've daisy chained together this massive storage structure.
Yes. And then to relieve some of the stress off of my GPU, I stream through an Elgato capture card out of my main PC. So I have 2 PCs inside of one that's connected to a NAS that's also in my PC. So there's 3 computers inside of one of my computers.
See, right now, you and I have totally different setups and perspectives on PC building. I don't have an exotic PC or NAS storage or anything like that working to my benefit. I have a very, very middle of the road PC that it's taken me a very long time to get to because I'm super fixated on budget PCs.
Right.
All of my storage around the house is done via wireless cloud. I've got one PC at my TV that's got single channel memory. It's an HP all-in-one that's kind of garbage. It doesn't do much of anything, but the CPU is quad core, so it works well for video playback, and that's about the extent of it. It's my
Right.
television PC.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one more in the back. That's my all-in-one PC that's running the external graphics. That's the one I daily drive that I spend the most time with. It really does all of the daily work. That's my favorite one. And it's about as cheap as you can get for 12 years old. Like he bought it, the old man bought it for $1,000 when he initially bought it. It's lasted way longer than it was supposed to have. It had low-end hardware in it. It got a couple of upgrades. It's one of the best computers I think I've ever used. And then
Don't
I've
you
got my
love
one
it?
here, and they all transfer storage between each other when I need something. It's all done wirelessly through my home network.
My NAS does that as well. So does my laptop. My laptop is in another room, and then I have a work laptop that I don't really talk about because it's just a work laptop. Who gives a shit? It's just an i3 whatever, HP garbage, whatever. Um, do you run FileZilla or anything like that?
None particularly, no, I don't really need to. I just kind of use everything that's built into Windows to run my home network and move things. And
Okay,
Steam Cloud works if I want to play things between places. I can't really use that for the television because that PC, as great as it does video playback, cannot do streaming for the life of it. Can't handle
got
it.
you.
Single channel memory is the biggest limiter, but it's only built with a single RAM slot. So when I went to open it to upgrade, that kind of was a kick in the nards.
Mm-hmm. What size case do you run?
I have a mid ATX case for my basic PC. It's as middle of the road, middle ground as you can get. It's from the company DIY PC, who's super cheap and like not made of the greatest material. Uh, but the airflow is good. It's got stoppers that lift the front panel out a little bit, so there's good airflow through that side. The front of it's got dust vents and lifted and got plenty of hole and airflow through that. It's big enough to fit a good size 42 millimeter radiator if I had the size or if I had the water block to go with it and all of the shit.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like water cooling.
Right. So I
This
have an
PC,
eATX case.
you have a massive boy,
Yes. My from corner to corner, my PC is 48 inches long.
man.
Yes.
See, mine is maybe 22
Mm-hmm.
by 24.
But to fit everything and have the back-to-back motherboard, I'm required to have that. Like that is a very specific, you are an enthusiast grade
You have a
equipment.
you have a full ATX motherboard, right?
Yes.
See, that's the huge difference here is I don't. I have a mini ATX motherboard. So
Mm,
it's got all of its RAM slots, got a couple of M.2, it's got two PCIe slots, but it's smaller in size. It's more compact. It's put together. The VRMs heat up amongst each other, and the capacitors are kind of lined up in a row around each other.
and you're using a Ryzen 3600X?
Yeah. Ryzen 3600X on an ASRock Phantom B550, 32 gigabytes of Trident Z.
It's a good
But that
PC
was
though.
the only kill thing that I put in this PC. I really wanted RAM that was shiny and pretty to look at. So I bought a set of Trident Z and a set of Trident Z Royal, and they look great together. And you do not need to buy those pieces of RAM for the kind of PC I have. You don't even need 32 gigabytes. I just wanted it.
No, I mean honestly, when you go into certain games and you see how much RAM is being utilized, you'd be very surprised. But for a basic PC, I honestly don't think anything more than 8 gigabytes is necessary. If you're running
Right.
at 3200 megahertz, 8 gigabytes is fine. Oh,
You
almost
can't run pro tip, you cannot run Cyberpunk 2077 with 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's
nope,
just not gonna happen.
won't happen.
I blew up a motherboard with that.
You did. You were very upset.
I I physically blew up a motherboard playing Cyberpunk with too little RAM. That was back during the memory leak problems. I'm sure that's fixed now. It's probably not.
Yeah, just don't. Um, so my PC, the reason why I have such a big case is I have underneath my GPU is a hacked, not hacked, quote unquote, but modified m- mini PC. You know, those little box PCs you can get, the little ones that you can find on Amazon. They're like 120 bucks. Well, they have a little Intel Atom PC in them. I took that apart and I cut out a PCIe bracket and I installed it inside of my computer. So
That's a
then,
neat little configuration.
right. And what that allows me to do is then I can take the mini PCIe bridge, like you were talking about with the eGPU, and I extended it out to two risers. I put it in place of where they would be on my case. So I can slot in a USB hub and a capture card. And then I can bridge the connections and I can connect it to it from my phone, or I can put it to a separate monitor. Currently, it's set up to a second monitor.
Like a
Uh,
cloud hosting device,
yes.
effectively.
And if need
Neat.
be, I can use an application called Space Desk, and I can actually pull up a whole different PC as a window on my computer. So with that, I can set up a stream or I can record and I can just utilize an Elgato capture card to do all of that instead of, say, my graphics card. So if I want to stream something, as you've seen with my ray tracing content and stuff like that, sometimes that's too taxing on my GPU, so I can't stream something like that while using NVENC, so I have to do it through a secondary preliminary PC. And that was my
I
answer.
took I took the totally opposite route. My base PC runs as my network storage if I technically have network storage. Because Windows is running on my SSD, I've got spinning disk hard drives holding all of my data for everything. I have 8 terabytes of spinning disk holding everything,
Right.
and everything else in the house just kind of works on that.
I only run 3 SSDs. I have one in my laptop, and then there's
Good God.
two for my main OS.
You also have an Intel Optane.
I do have an Intel Optane, yes, which is probably the most worthwhile M.2 you can possibly buy right now. They're like $100 for a terabyte, and they are by Jesus fast. Like, oh my god, this is. I mean, the Samsung Evos are fast. Do not get me wrong, but I still to this day think the Intels are beating them.
Especially like if you got like a Hyper M.2 slot, because that'll give you the speed benefit.
And if you're running an Intel, because obviously the platforms
Right.
work in tandem. Ryzen's a wonderful choice, especially if you're on a budget too. Like getting a 1300 right now is so cheap. If you want to,
Right.
you can probably pick up a 1070, a 1060 for 200, $250 if you're lucky.
I'm a huge fan of the FX 8350s. I think they are great CPUs. They do everything you could possibly need a CPU to do. They're not extremely expensive. And it's what we got shortly before Ryzen.
Are they still cheap?
They're still pretty cheap.
Amazon says 225. I'm curious because I might build
You can get
something
an
with that.
FX 8350 for 40 to 60 bucks on eBay.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Yeah.
For a 4 gigahertz 8 core?
Yeah, that it's an actually very insane purchase. If you're going to just get one that the 8300s and the 8150s are cheaper.
Oh, these are a steal for 8 cores. If you're doing like video rendering or something like that and you need a budget PC for video rendering, dude, these are
Right.
phenomenal price tags.
Right. The FX 8350 is a huge, huge purchase. Even now, AMD PCs have a few bugs, they're whatever.
Of course.
I've learned to live with it. I'm sure if someone as easily frustrated as me can live with it, everybody can.
If there's anything within a PC that you would say buy brand new, would you say it's the power supply?
Yeah,
I agree.
always. Power supply and spinning disk hard drives. Buy them brand new 100% of the time. Spinning disk hard drives, you never know what the hell you're going to get. You never know how many times it's been written to, how much it's vibration it's taken over time. You don't even know if it'll arrive to you still working after the shipping process. So,
Facts.
not really all that worth it unless you buy one from a brick and mortar store that's been refurbished.
Fun story. Oh, and be careful with refurbishment because sometimes they're filled with helium or nitrogen to protect from corrosion, and opening it will release that gas, which means they will decay even faster.
Right.
Uh,
Don't open your hard drive. Just don't do that. Don't open hard drives. Don't open power supplies. That's dumb.
yeah,
Don't do
don't do
that.
that. Don't do that. That especially power supplies. You don't know if those capacitors are
Right.
completely cleared. You could easily kill yourself.
Plenty of videos of professionals on YouTube opening power supplies, but guaranteed you and the general public are likely not a professional capable of opening that thing without seriously injuring or killing yourself.
So
It's rough thing to do that.
I have a fun story, and this is got to do with hacking, and everybody loves hacking stories, right?
Right.
So I was refurbishing my Xbox. I'm sure you remember when I was doing this, and I had to purchase an IDE hard drive for that Xbox, and I wanted a 200 gigabyte or a 500 gigabyte. Yeah, good luck finding a 500 gigabyte. That's not going to happen. IDE. Um, so I had to get a used or new old stock IDE. Well, I found a new old stock IDE GPU or hard drive. Sorry.
Did IDE hard drives even hit 24,000 RPM? Was that a thing? Like,
Yes, the Raptors did.
honestly, I had no fucking clue.
Well, when I found it, it was a Mac store, 2400, believe it or not. And dude, this was like the scariest job I had ever done because I didn't know IDE cables could carry power
Oof.
and you have to hot swap it.
Yeah. That's kind of the point of I found out that that was what the hot swap feature on my generic motherboards was for. The IDE hard drive support.
Sketchy.
Sketchy. It
Super
people you
sketchy.
see movies of dudes sitting in big server rooms changing out hard drives all day long. That's very real. People actually do that.
Yep. And I never want to do it again. I was successful. The Xbox is fully functioning. It is fully refurbished. No issues with it. It's running Linux now. It even has USB ports for connecting up mouses and keyboard. It browses the internet on Ethernet. It's super cool.
I said I was never gonna play or turn on the Xbox that I bought from you, the day one 360, because it's just not worth turning
Oh,
on.
it's iconic though.
Yeah, it sits like a beautiful bird perched on a little Bible on a shelf, and it's like it's just got its own little pedestal there.
That's so cool. So I sold him. I had a collector's edition Jasper model.
Yep, with the strange power connector.
Yep, it had the weird power connector, no HDMI.
No hard drive. It's got a hard drive plate cover.
Yep, very bizarre. There weren't that many of those, if I'm not mistaken. Those didn't sell much. And that has the
No,
silver faceplate, right?
yeah. No, it's got the white faceplate.
Okay, it has the
It's a
white
it's a
faceplate.
launch edition. It's got a white faceplate with a silver disc faceplate.
Dude, the thing is mint, mint condition. That's so cool that you love it.
I do. I have it sitting up. It's just kind of perched there. It's a great reminder of like a great time in my childhood where I spent most of it with the Xbox 360. I still think old consoles are kind of viable if you can find them. Since we're talking about old viable hardware, the original Xbox and the modding scene for that is huge, has been huge, will always be huge because the console itself is unlimited in its capability if you're working inside of it.
Yep.
Like if it is what you're designing shit for, you'll never run out of shit to do with it.
Just to give people an idea of just how capable this thing is, there is currently a team working on getting Steam, the Steam OS, the Linux version of Steam OS, as an app within the Xbox so you can launch it and run DirectX 9 games with a mouse and keyboard on an
And
Xbox.
that shit would be awesome. You know how awesome it would be incredible to run a game like the original Tomb Raider or GTA San Andreas or Vice City, running their PC ports with settings capabilities so you can really push the original Xbox to see what it's actually capable of, what the graphics that you were missing out on, what it could do. You know,
Mm-hmm.
consoles are limited by what they can do in most instances. And in this instance, like that's a revolutionary idea for such
Yep.
an old piece of hardware.
Just think
It
of remote
revives not
play.
only the hardware, but the games.
Think of
Man,
remote
the
play
remote
too.
play.
Like,
You can set up entire cloud-based remote play for yourself for old games that you like without ever having to touch a regular emulator or stuff like that. None of the crazy setup, just like
mm-hmm.
some shit that if you already have it, people sell modified Xboxes. You can buy them.
Oh yeah.
That's how easy it is to get a hold of a modded Xbox.
That's why I had to do that project. Like, I had already done the PS2. I did the F2P network. I set up my network attached storage so I can FileZilla all games from systems to system, you know. I had
Right.
to do it. I had to know what it was like to mod an Xbox original because And I tell you, dude, it was so worth it. It's such an interesting job. It's terrifying, but you're really getting into the guts of that thing, and you're really getting into the programming, and you're doing some extreme exploitation. It really is just a really fun experience to mod an Xbox original. And if you have one and it's broken, do your research. I recommend it. It's very fun.
Right. The Wii, the original, the Wii was great for modifying. It was super easy. You never even had to take anything apart. That's how easy it was. You could play all kinds of backups and emulators, and there were so many awesome things you could do with the Wii. Wii Homebrew is its own indie game sect of games developed specifically for the Wii and
Hmm.
ports to the Wii, and it's really impressive.
And if you have a PS2 lying around, FMCB, I believe it is. You can just go ahead and Google FMCB PS2 memory card, and you could just pick these up. I think they're like $12. You can completely hack your PS2. You can re-enable the USB ports to accept external hard drives, and things like that. So if your disk drive's broken, you can play your backups. You can play
I
ROMs,
think that's one of the coolest things about modding old consoles is being able to unlock USB port capabilities that were always there, but we never got to use.
right? I mean, for the longest time, the PS2 sitting right next to me was just a phone charger, just a fancy phone charger. Now it has an SSD, a 500 gigabyte SSD installed inside of it. It's connected to my PC through FileZilla, which means I can always access that drive. It's a part of my NAS, and it's phenomenal. I got the remote, the Mad Catz remote for it.
Do you have the 720p video adapter so you can fucking do full conversion to HDMI?
I got one better for you. I did the HDMI chip mod.
Oh, that's sweet. Those are always great.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, you can modify your consoles like with physical ports if you're the super smart and savvy kind. But like if you are that kind, you probably already know that.
Yeah, you're probably not watching this video.
Yeah, you don't give a shit about us. We're nobodies. Fucking randos on the internet talking about our old ass computers and shit.
I still have my Core 2 Quad PC from my very first one from when I had a GTS 6600 in it.
That's super neat.
I don't have the GTS 6600 anymore, but I still have my 650 Ti. It's actually in my living room PC.
You know me, got a big stack of motherboards, got the motherboards hanging on the wall. I've got a few graphics cards up here. Like I just love old hardware. I've got an 8600 GT and a GT 210 on the same wall sitting right to my left, both of which are really old, very pretty to look at cards. And I just like looking at PCB. I don't know. I think the design of PCB is
Oh,
stylish.
it's
It's
stunning.
aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah. I love when you find like older PCB boards that are like clearly post prototype because they're like red paint or
Right.
they're black
Uh,
paint.
I have an Acer Boxer 61 here with a PCI Express slot removed and
Mm,
a test BIOS on it because it was a showcase model, not an actual viable model. And it's one of the most interesting pieces of tech I think I've ever owned.
that's sweet.
It's got a CPU in it, both of the RAM slots filled. It's still got its mini PCIe, its PCIe 1X slot on it.
That's
Uh,
sweet.
yeah, it's a really neat thing that.
The rarest I ever owned was a i5 Black Ops, and it was a Generation 4 i5 Black Ops. And when I sold it, because the PCB is literally black, it has all the devs kit stuff, all that wiring was already all in the chip. I was expecting like maybe $120, but I ended up making like close to $1,000 on that chip. And the way I got it was just bargain hunting. I was just going to Goodwill looking at PCs and buying them for $50, and one of them just so happened to have a pre-release i5 Black Ops installed on it for a showcase PC.
So that's always cool. You come up on some engineering samples that you just can only find in one place at random like that. Those are always sweet.
Hmm.
And you get a piece of computer history to hold on to.
So I don't mean to deviate the conversation, but we are at an hour, and I want to get into why somebody would want a PC outside of gaming, because obviously everybody loves gaming these days. Gaming's huge. What are some of the other reasons or other use cases you have
PC
for PCs?
PCs can connect to your television, use all of your streaming services and shit, and do video playback. You can check websites. There are all kinds of aside from games to play, there are all kinds of pieces of software that allow you to do every number of creative things, from 3D modeling to drawing to music to whatever the hell you might be thinking about doing. Like, if you've ever had any creative idea at all, you can accomplish it through a computer. That's a fact. Computers are good for educating yourself. There are a lot of resources on the internet to teach yourself incredible things that you probably wouldn't have even thought of. If you're willing to put the time in to look for the website on a PC, you're probably willing to put the time into watching the video or reading the article or reading the book explaining it to you.
That was very well said. Um, I guess I'll just expand on that from more of like an engineering tailored experience because that's kind of where my mindset is. Um, Once you get into PCs and you begin to explore things like multi-monitoring and super usering, you'll learn that PC is so much more than just a personal computer at that point because you'll start doing things in the cloud, like streaming to mini PCs that you attach up into different rooms. You can get into buying little laptops out of, the clearance aisle at Walmart, and you'll be able to host VMs for your friends so you can have LAN parties and have a room dedicated to that kind of stuff. You can no longer have physical media, so you can actually downsize on your waste and your carbon footprint by just storage and putting things on a hard disk that will last 12 to 15 years depending on how much you use it. There are so many more viable use cases. You can cut back on your electrical costs by, having one PC running your living room TV, your bedroom TV, just by getting, wireless HDMI links. And you
I
can
think
really expand
behind
everything.
behind everything, having fun.
Oh yeah.
Having fun. You can do you the further and further back you dig yourself into hardware, the more interesting hardware becomes. Taking a look back at things all the way back to the original Windows from before Bill Gates is as interesting as putting together a PC now.
Mhm. I mean, I still have a Dell Latitude laptop that was initially purchased for college for me. I'm old. And it had Windows XP on it. I ended up putting Windows 7 on it. And that has been running my downstairs TV for God, 10 years.
Wow.
Yep.
See, that's incredible.
I just
I
space desk it to my main desktop upstairs and I can just stream whatever I want to it.
see that's the benefit of old hardware. You can have it and use it forever almost.
Hmm.
Like as long as you take care of it, it'll still work.
I mean, that's all it really comes down to. And I don't know, like I have these conversations with people and they don't understand why I push them to get computers. I'm like, oh, you can enjoy your consoles. Nobody's saying that you can't enjoy your consoles. I don't like consoles, but you can still enjoy a console, of course. But at the end of the day, a console is just a TV, or I'm sorry, a computer, a very, very limited computer.
Right. There was a time not very long ago when I recommended the Atari VCS because for $300 you got a Ryzen CPU, M.2 support, a pretty decent internal graphics adapter, and access to install Linux. And I thought I still think for the price point, it's worth it.
Right, me too.
It's a good homage to classic hardware. It's worth it now. It's low end. It uses old hardware in a more modern situation.
Hmm.
I mean, the Atari library is not great, but the hardware itself, pretty good.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, everything that we do. I mean, whether you're on your cell phone, whether you're on your Xbox, you're always using a computer these days. So one of the best things that you can do is understand computers, like a job. Like you might be required to use a PC at a job. So knowing how to navigate Windows 10, 11, 7, will be very advantageous for you to get that job done. Knowing how to type quickly will be very advantageous for you in a job. Just taking the time, even with old hardware and recycling old hardware, to give yourself something to do, whether that's assisting script writing online, whether that's making little YouTube videos, whether it's gaming or streaming or learning how to set up a cloud in your own home. You only need one computer to do all of those things. You want to do art, digital art, get a drawing tablet, something like that. You're going to need
And
a
you know what?
computer.
Even old ass computers have drawing tablets that are available for them. A lot of people upgrade it after a decade or two of using their Wacom 12WXs. You can find a used one that might be a little scratched, but it'll still do everything you want it to do for like $60.
Right.
Between you and me, I bought an Artist 15.6 from XP Pen. I've had it for 4 years. It's the most incredible pen display I think I've ever used. I bought it on sale during the holidays for markdown. It was like $250. Absolutely incredible. It's my second monitor.
Yeah. I mean, again, monitors, setting up multiple monitors, like it's huge. Like your ability to multitask just goes through the roof. Right
You
now,
can
I
go
have research on my right monitor. I have all of my stream information on another monitor. On my left monitor, I have my Steam, I have chats, I have all kinds of stuff going on. But I can just turn my head and I have access to all of this information.
and if you think like, oh, extra monitors are expensive, they're really not. You can go to your local Goodwill. If you have one good monitor, you can go to your local Goodwill, spend $5 on an old 1024 by 1024 business monitor.
Yep. You might have to go to Amazon and order a conversion for like VGA to HDMI,
Might come up
but who
lucky on
cares?
a super sweet fucking miniature flat screen with the bare minimum HDMI support, a 900p
Hmm.
side monitor, which doesn't look fantastic, but it'll still do exactly what you want it to do.
Like I do a lot of studio setups, right? And they always are like, "Oh, I want to get that Samsung, what is it, like 85R
But what the fuck is the
36
point
inch hyper
other than
wide."
having a Samsung?
And I'm like, "Well, those are cool, but it's going to use up all of your desk. And when you load up a
Right.
game, it's going to be so finicky. Why don't you just get two 32-inch Scepters that do 75 hertz and just see how you like gaming on PC first? You might not even enjoy it. But having two monitors, you're going to be able to easily segregate your windows and organize yourself so where you can stream very efficiently. I very often tell people you don't need to spend $1,000 per component. It's unrealistic. It's not financially viable, especially if you're getting into streaming. You need to think about it like a business. If you're getting into YouTube, if you're going to be making content and that's going to be the main focus of you gaming, you can't be spending thousands of dollars because you're not making any money until you get the money returned to you through your production. At what point, it becomes more of a hobby. That's why I always tell everybody I'm not a YouTuber for the money. I'm a YouTuber for the hobby of it. I
Right.
appreciate talking to you. I appreciate talking to my friends. I appreciate making content and seeing fun, positive feedback.
Right. I make content because I want to. I have a
Right,
regular ass job. I don't make a penny off of YouTube. I don't take donations. I don't take donations for anything. I give to charity a lot. I do this because I enjoy it.
right.
And that's a big thing for me. I have a regular ass job aside from this that maintains my life. And
Hmm.
then this is my hobby. This is what I do for fun because you can manage your time, do things for fun, and kind of balance out your life a little bit. You'll come to find that a good balance of stress and enjoyment are a great way to keep yourself both sharp and healthy.
Oh, especially being on the internet. Like, as soon as you join the culture of the internet, there's so much that you have to learn. I'm still learning to this day.
Right.
Like, just sometimes you have to be more careful with the things that you say, and it makes you more aware of yourself and your opinions and makes you want to be more supportive of other people, but also, be
See, I'm never careful.
cautious.
I'm never careful. I never say anything I regret. I just learn and
Hmm.
then don't say those things again.
Right,
If you learn and then you don't say something stupid after the fact, there's no need to be careful because you just don't do it.
right,
Right.
right.
I get some people learn a thing and it's uncontrollable to have it blurred out.
Hmm.
That's fine. after you have learned once, you shouldn't need to be told 10,000 times. That blurting out that thing probably isn't the most
But that's something
necessary or appropriate thing at the time.
that's something that I find, in my daily life isn't really a common occurrence. But with the
Yeah.
internet, it is much more of a common because you're so
But It's
connected
it's
constantly.
only a common occurrence because people claim that to feign deniability. Like people walking themselves back is feigning deniability 100% of the time. I've never found an instance where I feel like somebody has genuinely misspoken to me.
Right. I don't know. I just feel like there's so much. I mean, so many people look at, building a computer and entering the gaming space or entering the YouTube space, Twitch space, whatever, as this, unobtainable reality. But it really isn't. You need to go in with an expectation. You need to recognize your financial situation, tailor your experience and your understanding to the world that you're entering because it is a much more connected universe. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people you can interact with every single day. And that is
In
a beautiful and amazing thing. I say it's magic. It literally is magic.
in my childhood, from 2008 to 2012, I didn't have great computers. I had limited access to the ones that I had. And when I had them, I did literally everything I could to maximize on the experience that I had rather than underappreciating the fact that like it wasn't as good as something else. Like, there's a point when you have to stop, look at what you have, take that, appreciate it, and it will take you somewhere better.
And I kind of had a different experience because, I had whatever console I wanted. I could go out
Right.
and get whatever computer I wanted. I mean, most people were like, "Holy shit, you have a Core 2 quad and a GTS 6600." Like at the time, that was huge. I was playing Oblivion at max graphics and people were coming over and they were like, "Holy shit, that looks good."
Right. I didn't even have my first graphics card until 2015.
Right. Which, God, 7
It
years
was a
ago.
50 it was a 5450, so or something a 4350, something like that. Some ridiculous old
HD?
AMD card that wasn't all that great.
HD.
And yeah, and a Core 2 Duo PC that also was not very great.
Mhm. But you maximized it. You utilized it.
Yeah.
You understood what it could do and you tailored your experience around the hardware.
There is a single video on my channel today done on that PC,
That's cool.
showing off like what I was capable of at my absolute maximum for a few seconds at least.
That's pretty sweet, honestly. I have a meme video where I took a library Optiplex that had like a Pentium in it and I put like an
Those really small ones that
yeah,
look all awkward, though
l-
those things are weird.
like I angle cut the case and I forced a PCIe slot in it and I did all this crazy stuff to make a GTX 650 Ti work in it. And then I was like, "Oh man, I can't wait to game." And I like set up a camera to record my TV, and it was like on my bed and would keep. But it was a joke. Like it was this like it was like a joke on the commentary community and this like over sensationalized. You need the best computer in the world mentality on YouTube. It was
So
a
the same
satire piece.
fucking thing we have now,
Yeah.
the satire turned again. God damn it, Onion! How were you right so many times?
I mean, yeah, it was like an onion satire piece on the technology community, and the people who got the joke got it. And they were like, "Oh, this is hysterical. What a great piece." I don't get an opportunity to make that kind of content very often, so when I had that chance, it was great. And I still think that video holds up today because all you have to do is take a couple hours of cell phone research, watch some Linus Tech Tip videos, watch some Gamers Nexus videos, get an idea of how computers function, maybe look up how to build a computer, and then just hop on eBay
I
and
guarantee you,
match your parts
if
up.
you have if you have never built a computer before in your life, you can spend 2 hours on YouTube watching a few Gamers Nexus and Linus Tech Tip videos, just 2 hours, and then buy everything you need. Watch a couple more videos during the week while you're waiting for those parts to get there. And then the very last day, just before you build your PC, watch a PC build video, and you've got it. It's instant. You don't even need that much practice. There's so little effort that goes into actually putting together a PC. It's time consuming, it's delicate, it's not complicated. That's the best thing about it. It's something that is so easy to look at. It's like putting Legos together.
Yeah, it is. And if you don't feel 100% comfortable, don't go for top end parts. Buy gigabyte tough parts, things that are
Buy
meant to be
stuff,
durable.
yeah, buy stuff that like you don't spend a shit ton of money on to test the waters before you go doing anything insane.
Because if you don't
You know,
feel
if you're willing
comfortable
to
or you
waste,
don't like it, you can just resell it. You could just throw it up
I
on
bought
Facebook or eBay and you could just resell it.
I bought a bunch of Pentium dual cores. I bought 5 Pentium dual cores for $1.
Hmm.
And that was a ridiculous buy on eBay. But now I have all of those CPUs. If I ever like don't feel comfortable messing with an LGA board that those would be used for, I have one now to mess with.
Right.
I wouldn't feel not comfortable. I've built too many PCs to not feel uncomfortable to feel uncomfortable with it. But if I ever did feel uncomfortable with a board like that, I would have something to work with that wasn't expensive. 50 cents, I can break that CPU, whatever. If I ever want to give an attempt at delitting a CPU, which I've never done before, I've got one of those.
Hmm. You could just test the waters.
Right.
You
Couple
could
cents out the drain, whatever. I delitted a CPU.
now, from an engineering perspective or a designer's perspective, like myself, I look at 5 Pentium CPUs that you got for $1, and you want to know what I think? There's 5 mini PCs that I can build, throw some Wi-Fi cards in it, and I can have remote access all over the house to whatever I want on my main PC. I don't need
Right.
to spend another $800 to build a second gaming PC to throw in the basement.
Right.
There you go. You just
With
$1 CPU.
$1 for 5 CPUs. It was incredible. You can still buy them, I think. If you go on eBay, you search CPU, you hit buy it now, and you sort by lowest price. You'll find bundles of CPUs that are like dual core and above that are very. You'll find your single core Semprons and your ones that go for like $5 individually or whatever. But you'll find very very small bundles of CPUs where you can build like mass build a bunch of small PCs at once.
Even modern Pentiums, don't buy Celerons, right? Celerons is the one that you want to avoid at all cost.
Right.
But I think it's the Pentium Golds that you can find dirt cheap. And they're like somewhat modern chips, CPUs, and they work really good with like 770s and 960s. Like really good. 720p gaming experience, 60 frames per second in most titles. Like if you just want something to load up CS:GO, 50, $60 probably.
See, here's if you wanted to like go the super old business, if you wanted to go the old business PC route, you can get lots of dual 2 Intel Xeon W3505s. They're 2.5 gigahertz, so 4 gigahertz altogether, running in tandem on a dual socket board.
I mean, it's
Kind of it's a lot, but it's fun to experiment with. That's part of the passion is finding something fun to mess with, and they're cheap. They're $1 for both of them. It's $1. That's an experiment I'd be willing to put $10 for a motherboard into.
right. Here's the Pentium Gold I was talking about. It is the G6400. It runs at 4 gigahertz and is a 2 core, and it runs on LGA 1200, which is a semi-modern motherboard. So you get that for $40. You throw it in a computer, you get a whatever GPU, let's say a 570. Throw that in there. You end up saying, you know what, I actually kind of like or prefer PC. You could take that out, recycle it, and throw in an i7 1200. So that would have been what? i7 700K,
Yeah,
right? 700. And that's already like a massive increase in power right there.
right.
Massive. And you're only changing one thing. And you already built it. So, I mean, what's there to learn? You already know what you're doing. i7 7700K is the 4.5 gigahertz on KB Lake. Is KB Lake?
This is an incredibly interesting. I'm going through eBay a little bit, looking at some stuff. There's a lot of. I mentioned this CPU earlier. There's a lot of 5 Intel Core i3 3220 up for buy it now. for $51 exactly. That's $10 a CPU.
Insane. Insane. The market is insane.
Insane. You could walk away with a steal, build 4 PCs much cheaper than you would buy that CPU individually. Like, and the experimenting is fun if you wanted to build more than one PC at a time over your house. The benefits of old hardware aren't just there for the new user, but for like anybody who's just interested already in building PCs who might see it, build a bunch of them because there's a ton of old shit out there.
And you never know. Like, you could throw together 5 or 6 business PCs, find a good deal on okay display cards or graphics cards, and you can sell them. Obviously bench it, do your tests, check Fortnite, check CS:GO, check Valorant. Like, what are the frame rates? How is it running? And then you could post that and be like, hey, this PC was $120. It's getting 60 frames per second at 1080p for fucking Fortnite, and people will buy it, and you can get people gaming on PC on a really good budget. I couldn't
Right,
tell you how many times I've spent $1,000, built 10 PCs, and made $200 because people
right.
are looking for that.
And whether or not you spent a lot of money, if you make that money back, the profit that you pull, that extra $200, definitely worth the time and effort spent. Like you've spent enough money and made it back to make a good amount of money on the side after that.
And you had fun.
Right. And you had fun. You did something you enjoyed. You made money doing it. It was a good little chunk of side change to contribute to your next bit of whatever.
All right. So, change of course. Important things to note for people who are interested in building their first PC. I would say go with Intel because you're going to find Intel CPUs on the cheap. You said generation 3 or above, right?
Right.
I agree.
Uh, the Intel i3s and above are a good way to go.
Um, Obviously, we were talking about Pentiums and Celerons and things like that. Personally, avoid. Um, I would
Yeah.
stick to
If you're like,
i3 or better.
if you're building something that you want to use that's super viable, stick to the i3s or better. 564 GB, 574 GB, 1666 GB, something cheap like that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to do anything really with your power supply. You might need a different power supply if you're like building in an office PC, but if you're not building an office PC, there are a lot of good offerings for those CPUs. You can just buy a motherboard and another power supply, and it'll be cheaper. And building one of these old PCs is still cheaper than buying one,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, which is huge.
And then the
The fact that
second
we can still buy the shit and buy the components individually and build it is incredible.
second off, avoid anything proprietary, especially motherboards. If it has a
HP bad.
HP bad, yeah. Avoid anything that uses anything proprietary. Go with a name brand that's a little bit more exclusive. You have your EVGAs, your Gigabytes, your Auroras. You can still find base models within their layouts. Make sure your
If you
sockets
are
match up. Very important. Make sure your sockets match up.
if you are extremely ballsy like me, I'm 2 for 2 good unbranded generic motherboards.
Mhm.
They both have worked really well with no problems. I'm 2 for 2. I mean, I'll take that as a sign that the generic motherboard for like $30, $20 that's unbranded comes from some weird factory somewhere that, just slapped together from bin parts. Not a bad way to go.
Of course, there's going to be caveats. You might not know the specs as you get
Some of
more
them
into.
Some of them might have mobile chipsets, which is worth looking at.
Yeah.
I have that. I have one of mine as a mobile North Bridge and a regular South Bridge, and it's a weird monstrosity.
That's so fucking funny. But when you're shopping for a motherboard, make sure your LGA sockets match up if you're going Intel. If it's AMD, make sure it's AM3, AM3 Plus, AM4,
Game
make sure
4.
they match up. If you're going with like an older FX chip, make sure those AM number match up. And last but not least,
Make
always
sure you got
check.
them AMs, bruh.
Intel Arc is now a thing, so you can actually just Google what chip you have, and it'll give you all the information you need, including what speeds, memory you can use with it. Make sure your motherboard matches what you're looking for. Again, you can typically just Google it, it's all archived. Good websites are Tom's Hardware, User Benchmark for general knowledge. Tom's Hardware lets you ask questions.
Random Gaming in HD does a lot of really cool stuff
Mm-hmm.
with old hardware, so shout outs to him for that. There's some really awesome hardware stuff going on over there.
Who's the other guy? Is it just
Uh,
Budget Build? Is it?
yeah, but Budget Builds Official does
Oh,
old low end stuff at the same time, more
he's
really
great.
neat stuff. They cover the stuff that you wouldn't normally see, like in the higher end, the stuff that I personally like to buy and build. The old AMD HD cards, the 5450s, the 560 Ti's, cards from like way back that you just kind of
These are
buy to test and see how it did.
right. These are great places because modern benchmarking is becoming more popular. More and more YouTubers are getting into it, and
And
there's a niche community that wants benched older hardware.
right, having modern benchmark benefits for older hardware has been huge in keeping old hardware alive.
So make sure you're utilizing your space correctly. So if you're, shopping around for like let's say an LGA 1151 and you're not sure if that CPU is the right CPU for your use case, you can typically just give it a Google, maybe type in plus YouTube, find somebody who seems reputable, double check their sources, always double check your sources. And if it ends up seeming like it fits, follow it up, check, make sure the GPU is what you're looking for. Sometimes you might make a mistake and you might get something that's quite underpowered. Um, but as long as you do that quick research, it's very easy. There's tons of resources available, like I said, and you should be good to go.
Yeah. If you can think of it, somebody's probably benched it already. If you can think of a combo of hardware, you probably find some performance for something somewhere to demonstrate what it'll do for you, at
What
least at a baseline.
what I typically find, or when people don't want to pay me for training or they don't want to pay me for the classes that I teach, um, people will typically want to go out on their own and then they'll come to me with parts that they found and kind of just ask questions. And that's fine. What I find very often is these people watch something like Gamers Nexus or Linus Tech Tips, and then they are so overwhelmed with the information that they're given, they can't fully grasp what they're being told because they go really deep into specs. Like something that you need to have a pretty good understanding of what you're looking at to fully grasp.
I didn't even get into all of those guys in those videos until I got much older. I disassembled my first PC when I was like 10 and reassembled it like 3 years later,
Nice.
kind of just teaching myself what everything did. And, I read a lot of my system information and read a lot of internet articles about like PC hardware that was coming out and what it did. And I spent a lot of time reading hardware textbooks for superconductor layout, which was really interesting.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
But now we have the modern era.
Yeah.
Now you can just Google it.
Is the superscalar era, baby.
Let's
Actually, we're moving
go.
we're moving a little bit beyond that.
Yeah, we are. So, with RAM, I'm going back to the original conversation. With RAM, if it's you're no, if you're buying an LGA 51, it might support DDR3 at 2400 megahertz. So make sure that when you're shopping around, you're shopping within that bracket because if you go above, it might not work or it'll underperform. Um, you never know. Obviously, you can't utilize DDR4 or DDR2 if it's DDR3 acceptant. So just make sure you're paying attention to little things like that when you're shopping around. That'll make your life a lot easier. And use Intel Arc. Use manufacturer details. If like you said, a motherboard that's unbranded, if you don't feel comfortable with that, it is okay to spend a little bit more for a name brand that you can get
You can
documentation on.
you can read and Google search the serial numbers and names and logos and brands on chips on the motherboard also to help you kind of identify something if you don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you just come across a motherboard or something like that, a PCB from something that you just are unsure about and you have no clue what it is, take a look at the chips that are on it and the writing on it and kind of try to get your eyes in and read some of it because there's a chance you'll figure out what it's called or you'll get a model number or a serial number to work off of that you can trace back and like you may find something like really interesting worth working on just out of some random sidewalk come up. I know
Hmm.
that's a thing in big cities.
Like it might just have like this super unique Risk 5 onboard North Bridge that nobody knows about, and it's just this
Right.
weird obscure company that's putting it
You,
out, and
you
it could
might
just
come
be super
across
cool.
some fucking super strange PCI oscilloscope, like something nobody's ever seen before, and
Right.
like there's something really weird like that. The television antennas that used to run for PCs and shit are always interesting,
Hmm. Like
but you can
you would
always
have no
find it.
idea. You would have no idea unless I told you the motherboard that my Core 2 Quad is on is made by Asus. You would have no clue.
There's no marking to indicate it, no brand name, no anything like that.
Nada. It just says DDR3 2400 on it.
Beautiful.
That's all it says. It doesn't even have markies for putting it in a case. You just have to guess.
My Boxer 61 doesn't have too much writing on it, but it says Boxer 61, the serial number, and ES, so I assume that means engineering sample.
Probably. Anything else? Let's see. Cases. If you're buying an ATX case, make sure you're buying a.
Buy a case that fits your motherboard. Don't
Yes,
worry too hard on
exactly.
the aesthetic. Buy something that fits your motherboard that looks like it'll pass air through it pretty nice.
Hmm. I always tell people, especially if they have like an old PC that they just have laying around, take the CPU out, take it apart, see how it comes apart first. Take the whole thing apart, and then clean
You
up the
really want
CPU. See what CPU you have. You could be sitting on a very good CPU that you could move to a decent motherboard and have a great gaming PC on the cheap. You won't know unless you learn and take it apart.
That's personally how I've fixed many consoles and PCs over the years. You learn the best with hardware by disassembling it. You really do pick up exactly where things are supposed to go when you disassemble hardware, and you don't even need to know what that shit is called or what it does. If you know where it goes, you can try it and make sure it works. Simple repairs like changing a capacitor. I didn't know what the fuck a capacitor was until I was 16, but I knew what they were and I knew how to change them long before that.
Oh, that's sweet. What were you doing? Just like reading the tag on it and being like, "Oh, this is a 12 volt." I don't know, and then just finding something
I
that
called
looks
them
the same and replacing it.
I called them shock coils because I kept getting fucking electrocuted.
That's awesome. Ah! Gotta replace it.
Yeah.
Shooting
Ke-
cardboard onto the top of them.
Keep your hand grounded. Electric wristbands are good, but like if you're just like holding a piece of rubber in your offhand or grabbing the table, if it's made of wood or fiber or something, or like grabbing your shirt or I don't know, just grabbing something grounded while you're working on a PC, we're trying to work with one hand.
Yeah, always try to work with one
It's
hand.
good advice I can give.
Because then
Otherwise, you'll
the
fry your
electrical
brain cells like me.
the electricity, what to explain to reduce the fear of people real quick. So our bodies contain salt. Salt is the catalyst for electrical transfer. However, so many people are afraid of things like electricity reaching the heart or spasming your muscles.
As long as you're not conduiting electricity through both arms into the heart, you're
You're
fine.
fine.
Like your arm needs to be grounded so the electricity can go somewhere else. Like if both of your bare feet are planted on metal and you get electrocuted by your bare feet, the chances are it's not going to move up to your torso. It's just going to fry your bottom half.
Yeah, it'll cross
Like
your genital region.
right, foot to foot, it'll go directly through that and won't go anywhere else
Hmm.
because electricity works on circuits in loops.
And that does not mean that if you were to stand on one leg, you wouldn't feel a shock. You would feel a shock between your toe and your heel or something. It would
Right.
just be a
It just
different,
wouldn't go anywhere.
yeah, it would just be a different sensation. It'd be a different type of shock. So typically working with one hand, say you bridge a capacitor, you might have a shock between your fingertips at the
Right.
worst.
I've electrocuted one hand so many times that I've
Hmm.
got a flat space on my finger.
Same.
But my other hand is totally fine aside from like the guitar callus because I've always been pretty safe about like grabbing onto whatever's around me instead of my case or something in the case. I always have something in my hand around me. Like usually I'll be holding onto the plastic of my lighter
Right.
and that keeps me pretty safe.
But it's also important to note that this is also dependent on joules and voltages. Like the higher the voltage, the more you'll feel it up your arm because there's more energy transferring
That's
into your
why
body.
stuff like electrified gum is okay, but sticking your hand in a circuit breaker is not.
Right. Like there's always that joke that if you stick a fork into the outlet, you'll die. You could. Likelihood is kind of low. You're most likely spasm and drop the fork, or
Vaporize a little bit of blood in the vein in the hand.
yeah, you're more than likely going to be okay. It's going to hurt like hell. I'm not saying do it,
Yeah,
but
don't do that.
yeah, unless you have like you're grabbing onto say a metal chair leg and then you stick a fork in, it's going to shoot across your body into the chair leg and then try to go to the ground, which
Right,
means you're
just
more
keep
likely to die.
one hand off of metal or electrolyted circuit surfaces all the time. You
And
know,
when he says
one hand
electrolyted,
away.
he just means containing a form of salt or a conducting material.
Right. There are fluids that don't have electrolytes in them that you use for water cooling and stuff that
Hmm.
don't conduct anything, that don't transfer that don't interfere with if they spill, they don't cause too much damage to your internal components and stuff
Hmm.
like that.
There's a
Uh,
lot
s-
of experiments online where they show electricity traveling through water and it doesn't because it's distilled. Then they add salt and then it's a perfect conductor.
right.
We see this all the time.
Right. If you were to like take a bath in your house and most of your city's water was primarily distilled, somebody walked in and like threw a toaster in, chances are not much is going to happen.
They might just throw the circuit, honestly, because
Right.
it's just gonna bridge itself.
Right, but you yourself probably aren't gonna take too
Yeah.
much of that.
Now, say you're taking a Epsom salt bath. Now it's a completely different story.
Yeah, now you're kind of fucked. The salt's gonna pass it's gonna pass through all of the salt everywhere. Salt particle to particle, it's just gonna move all around you.
So,
Salt, it makes the difference. Conductors make the difference. They really do.
mhm,
You yourself, your whole body, the salt we contain naturally, that's what moves the electricity.
mhm.
And you kinda have to avoid that.
Potassium as well. I mean, you find a lot of potassium around the heart and things like that.
You're a fucking potassium.
Okay, bro. This is a good segue into thermal load, and I want to talk about people who are so obsessed with thermal on their computer. So if you've made it this far, computers pretty well. I kind of want to teach someone something a little bit different. Is that cool with you? Can we keep going?
Yeah.
So when you're building your computer, a lot of people like to think of wattages as energy, and that is a true statement. Wattage is energy, but
Wattage is heat.
it is also heat. So when you displace wattages, it is displaced as heat. Uh,
Amps and volts are more the electric part of electricity.
and joules,
And
and not the
joules.
vaping kind.
No, yeah, don't vape electric joules.
Where the fuck is
I
my
mean,
joule?
I mean vape electric joules because they use electric, but don't vape you get what I mean.
Yeah, if you vape, good for you. We're not advocating it, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't give a shit. That's not what I'm saying at all. That's not. I just one vaping is different from another is what I'm saying. That's
Yes.
not what I mean. One joule is different from another is what I'm saying. Now I've twisted myself.
So when you see something like TDP of 125 watts and you have a power supply that is 750 watts, you can assume that at max load, a CPU will displace 125 watts. Now, where are those watts going when it's consumed becomes the question. That's where coolers come into place. And what a lot of people think is a cooler's important job is to displace the heat, which is only kind of correct.
No, a cooler's job is to circulate heat properly,
Correct.
to circulate airflow and heat properly. So air heat moves up into the pipes, the heat pipes, that and spreads out into the fins of the heat sink, and then exhausts outward back into the room, so more room temperature heat can come back in.
Hmm.
So it's not heating a part of the room and it's not cooling a part of the room. It's regulating its own temperature to be stable while not destabilizing the room.
Exactly. It's fighting for equilibrium.
Right.
So if you're
Homeostasis.
kind of. So the reason why when you're shopping around for coolers, you'll see a lot of this conversation of are water coolers better than air coolers? And of course, this is a very conflicting statement. There's a lot of arguments within this space. I like water coolers. Red likes air coolers. But what it really comes down to is number one, what is the material that is taking that heat and displacing it? So is it aluminum? Is it copper? Is it silver?
Number
Copper,
two, what is your use case? What does your
exact,
case look
yes,
like? What's your airflow situation? What's your ambient temperature?
right. Do you like to keep your room super cold like I do? Do
Right.
you not care and are you comfortable in 90-degree weather? It's up to
Like
you.
if you keep your room extremely cold, you might not even need a fan. You could run passive cooling.
Right. I don't recommend it, especially when you get
Don't.
into higher end.
Yeah, a lot of Apple stuff is passively cooled. It overheats. It causes massive performance drops. Throttling is a
Hmm.
problem. When CPUs overheat, they throttle their performance and get lower so they can cool down so they don't damage themselves.
Correct. So when you're researching or looking for a cooler, what you're really looking for is the conductivity. So copper is more conductive than say aluminum, but you'll find a lot of aluminum components because it's cheap. It's lightweight. They can make them very big. So then you're looking at things like surface area. Obviously, heating up a shit ton of water is a lot harder than heating up a little thing of aluminum with a bunch of fins. And
The Hyper 212, the best thing about it is it's a little copper center plate inside of a small aluminum block with the heat pipes coming up off of the block and into a much larger heat sink
mhm,
where the heat is moved.
right.
So it's
And
multiple materials conducting heat into different places in a more, I guess, stimulated manner.
yes, that's actually a good terminology. So each fin essentially is surface area for air to cross and remove wattages.
Right.
And what you will find with computers in particular is what we have kind of called the heat soak. And this is when the PC is pretty much stable at during a certain event. So if you're playing, say, Forza 5, you look over and your PC is running at 101C, and you're probably like, oh shit, my computer is super hot. It's not. It's just at equilibrium. This is where it's going to run, it's going to throttle here. That's it. So it's
Right.
displacing 101C consistently into the room and equalizing. So eventually your room could heat up to that point, but realistically it's unrealistic.
Optimally, you do not want your PC running over 100 Celsius. That's typically pretty bad.
Yes, I was going to get into that. So if you're seeing your PC run at 101C, it would be advantageous for you to consider more surface area for displacing that heat. So getting a HyperX instead of a stock cooler would then decrease your temperatures.
On the other hand, what kind of fucking slob are you? Do you ever clean the dust out of that thing?
Yes.
I mean,
Or you might want to add another fan. This will add more
right.
turbulence to the air, which will then dissipate the heat quicker.
Or and something not many people think about. I've mentioned it a couple times now. What does the room feel like? Is it hot in the room? If you enjoy the heat in the room, but it's affecting your computer, then fucking turn up your cold air and make sure the room's ambient temperature is better.
Right.
If it's too cold, the same fucking thing. Because PCs will stop functioning properly if they're too cold.
I
With,
What did I just do? I just sent you a picture the other day. What did I just do?
you almost froze your PC.
That's right. In my house, I have central air that is set to 74. We like the house at 74 year round. That does not change. However, my office in particular, when I'm gaming, typically gets up into the hundreds, especially during long streams. I had to install a AC unit dedicated to just one room because I was going to kill my 3080 if I didn't.
We hit 91 today. I think it's the perfect temperature, but it also means I need as much fucking cooling as I can get. So my CPU doesn't really run at a curve. It just runs at maximum speed most of the time.
Right. So In essence, what I'm getting to is you want to be aware, and this is not something that is talked about very often online. You'll hear a lot about thermal curves, etc., but what you need to be aware of is thermal soak and what we call turbo heat, which is just when you're using your PC, what is the temperature it's running at? Is it just running too hot? If it is, you might need more surface area to displace that heat. If you want a smaller cooler, you might have to change materials. If you have an aluminum one, you might want a full copper one. It's really not that difficult when you get into understanding the thermodynamics of it. Red's learned a lot. I've learned a lot from Red. It's just a part of PC building is understanding what Lego pieces fit the best together.
Right. And you don't have to worry too hard about things like bottlenecks or things like that. You do have to worry a little bit, but most bottlenecks don't change performance all too drastically. There's a lot of leeway for you to mix and match and do whatever you feel like doing, as long as like it's stable, running at a good temperature, running in a comfortable environment, and you're maintaining like your internals a little bit. Remember, like, clear your registry entries once every so often, clear your DirectX shader cache and your temporary files once every so often. Um, Defragment your hard drives, but do not defragment SSDs because they have a finite number of writes,
Facts.
stuff like that.
Even on old PCs, if it's viable for you, always install your Windows operating system or Linux operating system, whatever you choose, on an SSD. It is
You can, in
2022.
fact, you can, in fact, use SATA SSDs on old Windows 95 PCs and above.
Yes.
So there's literally no excuse to not have. I mentioned before we started recording, I had been working on an old laptop for a little while there, and I still have it in the other room. I bought it for $40, spent $20 on a 120 gigabyte SSD and $10 on another stick of RAM. And it's old, old Toshiba satellite, not the greatest thing, but it functions for exactly what I want it to do, and that SSD is the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if
SSDs
I
are
didn't
game
have it,
changers.
yeah, if I didn't have it, it would probably be much more frustrating. I've had an SSD running my operating systems for a long time now. I'm not quite used to waiting on computers to load as much as I was when I was a kid. Like when I was a kid, I could wait hours for one page to load. Now I can't. I'm a little bit more impatient. There's a lot more going on in life around me, so I don't really have the time to wait for hours for one thing to load.
Exactly. And when it comes to business minded people like myself and yourself, when you're working on your computer constantly and you're doing something like a
You just
hobby,
want to be able to pop between stuff, get into something and go. You don't want to wait on a loading screen. You just want to be in.
especially if you're trying to build a cheap PC for like something like Tarkov, you're gonna want an SSD. We talk about hard drives. I have 22 terabytes of hard drive storage. It is not fast. Like compared to my Quantum or Octane, it is so slow. But if I'm just streaming something like Frostpunk or Final Fantasy V, who cares if I have to wait
Right.
an additional 20 seconds? But when it's your operating system and you're just trying to open Firefox and it takes 12 minutes to launch stuff, that's not good.
Something not a lot of people understand about SSDs and the way that they work is that when Windows is running and loading everything for Windows, all of its operations on the SSD, and then everything else is running on a hard drive, that SSD gets to run at its maximum performance. Windows is taking absolutely no time whatsoever doing what it has to do to make sure that your hard drive can focus specifically on running the game or whatever you have running on that. It it,
Exactly.
it helps with speed having them separated. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Windows being able to operate independently by itself with no external factors on the drive that it's on
And
is massive.
it's okay to install stuff on your C drive. Like if you want to put Mozilla, OBS, and things like that on your C drive, that's fine. But for game
But if you're looking,
performance, you
yeah,
want to
if you're
run it on a
looking to
separate drive.
absolutely maximize separate drive, because that Windows SSD, Windows will use the bandwidth and speed and lane width of that SSD 100%.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's so much faster. An SSD is you can locate that information so much faster so it doesn't tax the CPU for a longer period of time. When it's hunting on an HDD, it has to pull so much information just to find it.
Right. Whereas games and the way that their code is developed, they really only have to read directories, read files, display them with instructions that Windows has already processed.
Right.
So Windows doing all of the work needs the SSD benefit. Whereas
Exactly.
other things, the instructions just where the files are stored, all you really need to worry about is having a good enough speed to not interrupt the flow of files as fast as Windows can process them.
Facts. So if you're running something like a Gen 3 CPU with an okay GPU and you're like, "Oh man, this thing's running like crap." Well, you might be running like a 5400 500 gigabyte HDD because that's what you had laying around. But
Right.
that's going to become, and I know you mentioned bottlenecks usually don't matter, but in this scenario, a bottleneck does matter
You
because
can if
separate
it's a
that.
huge problem for you, if you don't think you can afford an SSD, I actually found a brand, NATAC, NETAC, good brand, good SSD. I've had really good luck with it. You can get a 256 gigabyte SSD for $22 right now, as of the filming of this. They're 40 normally. $22 right now for 256 gigabytes. That's enough to hold Windows and a few other things, and it's perfect. You don't
Oh.
need anything else. You can get a better SSD for faster write and read speeds, but ultimately, any SSD running Windows is going to be better than your solid state, than your solid disk drives. Spinning plate drives don't exactly run with write and read speeds at even a fraction of what SSDs run. So,
Yeah, they're doing like 1.7 gigabytes these days and pushing that even further beyond.
whereas like spinning disk drives, you're kind of limited to a couple hundred megabytes at maximum,
That,
maybe a gigabyte.
not to mention, mechanical drives are mechanical, which means there are moving parts, there are more points of failure.
You shake
They
it, you vibrate it, you stick a magnet to it, it's dead. That's it.
they're because there's motors in them, they're displacing heat, which means it'll increase the thermal load of your PC. That's why no hard drive is found within my PC. They're all external. There's a lot to it. Like when you get into the very high end performance or enthusiast grade PCs, you'll find that cutting edge is typically, or bleeding edge as we call it, is usually the best place to be for the host really high numbers. But again, this is like from the beginning of the video, I have stated you do not need to be bleeding edge or cutting edge. You can utilize the information of enthusiasts for budget PCs.
Yeah, you can get some really awesome high numbers out of some really old, cheap, easily accessible, budget-friendly shit. I make under $30,000 a year. My budget is super low, and I've managed to do incredible things as far as computers. So,
Uh,
the sky's the fucking limit, really.
and I'm on the opposite spectrum. I make good money. I have a very comfortable office PC setup and everything I want. But at the same time, I can recognize that as a business owner, somebody who works from their PC often, investing large amounts of money into my PC means I have to make that money back, which is unrealistic. So I take my enthusiast knowledge and I apply it to understanding how to build a really good PC within that budget. And this is
Right.
where Red and I come from. That's one of the reasons why we're so close is we're able to communicate to each other and conversate on these things and learn so much from each other that we both took
We
away so much.
Yeah, because we come from these very, very different places. You would take this old hardware and do what I would do for fun, whereas most instances I was doing it because I really didn't have a choice. It
Hmm.
was fun, but it was also just really what was available, and that's all I could do. Like these options, these things I've talked about, they're not just options I'm presenting because like I think it's the best option. These are the options I'm presenting from my real world experience, looking for the cheapest, the most budget friendly gaming option I could possibly put together.
Now, before we close out, PC gaming for you in your life, was it always the best option?
No, no. There was a very, very, very long time where whatever the hell console I had readily available that we dug out of some hole was the best option
Like,
because the PCs we had were pretty bad even for their time.
gotcha. So
I
then,
played some games, Humongous Entertainment, the Quake 2, I started building my Steam library 9 years ago,
mhm.
but back then I didn't have a computer to play any of that library.
See, I got into PC probably 2 weeks after the release of Xbox 360. So I had a completely different experience.
So I
That's
was on PCs from a young age, had
mhm.
them. I was educated in a tiny classroom, so I had them always readily available there for most of my young life. Uh, and then as I got older, PCs were just like always there. They were just always the lowest possible end you could end up with.
What about now?
Now I kind of make the decision to stay in the medium range because I know that you don't need to waste your wallet on exotic parts.
Right.
But I also like don't need to limit myself so heavily that I can't enjoy everything, you know? Like I honestly I like knowing that I can play things like Elden Ring and Halo Infinite and Resident Evil Village comfortably
Uh-huh.
without having to modify too many things because I put together a good PC. Because I finally have attained that middle ground area that I didn't get to experience for so long.
Would you would you ever go back to consoles, or are you pretty much PC for
I love
life?
my Xbox. There's a soft spot in my heart for all of it because I think if we don't appreciate consoles for their existence and we don't still use them, they just become e-waste. We can stop them becoming e-waste by actually using them. They're not great. They are severely limited, but that doesn't mean that you can't use them. Do you know how many old Nintendos and Game Boys get turned into synthesizers for musicians?
Mhm.
You can find a use for anything if you put your freaking mind to it. These things don't need to be filling up landfills around the world. The silicon that goes into this shit and has been sitting in it for 30 years doesn't need to suddenly one day go to waste 30 years later just because you don't think it'll do anything. You can actually use these things. I'll always have a soft spot for consoles.
Right.
But if you're looking for something that's the most efficient PCs are the way to go.
So, like, you have no plans on getting like an Xbox Series X or a PS5, like that is completely off the table for you?
PlayStation's totally off the table. I wanted to get a Series S because I wanted to play with some of the modding capabilities, just, personal thing.
Mhm.
I wanted to have fun with it.
You were gonna
But that's
treat
a
it like
me
a
thing.
computer. You were gonna mod it and hack it
Right.
and have fun. See, that's you weren't gonna use it as a Model S.
Right. I was still kind of gonna, I was gonna leave it plugged into my television, use it when I was laying down at night. I would turn on my Xbox and play something for a few minutes when I was going to sleep. Or there was always a use case for it, even with good PCs everywhere. And it was in bed in front of my television, or when it was just right there and quick and easy to pop into.
Right.
Or having company.
Yeah. I see.
They're
I'm on
use
the
cases
opposite.
for
I have, I have zero plans on getting a PS5 or an Xbox Series X. I have absolutely no use for it. I've had two Xbox Ones, never used them, just sold them.
I
I'm in
used man, my Xbox One, I used it so hard the power supply died.
a. I have no use for consoles. I don't see much of a use case. I think companies would be way better off investing in like the Xbox gaming laptop where it's just Windows, and the PlayStation laptop or PlayStation desktop where they're just computers with maybe a proprietary software that'll eventually be for everybody.
I bought a Switch because I don't like cell phones and wanted portable stuff, but you like cell phones, so that use case doesn't apply to you.
Exactly. I have OnePlus Nord McLaren. It's 12 gigabytes of RAM, I believe. I run emulators on it. It has a little controller adapter. I don't need it. I bought a broken Switch just so I live in New York. I can legally emulate it. Like that was the whole reason of buying it.
Y- that's not how that works. Like you can have the games without the hardware, make backups of your games, and still play them without it being illegal. Like you don't have to own the hardware.
So in New York State, and I don't know if other states are like this, but in New York State, you have to dump your system.
Ah,
And so like if you're playing say RC PCSX3, and you go to Sony's website and download their firmware, you're completely fine because it's a distro that's legally obtainable, without pirating or stealing. Same thing with like Nintendo DS's. It's all BIOSes that are recreated recreated. They're recoded. They're not the original code. For something like the Switch, as of right now, reuse Jinx, you must dump your own Switch.
See,
Sharing distros is illegal.
it is a little bit different here. I mean, distributing copies of your own backups is technically illegal, but you can download whatever copy of whatever game you want without ever having to dump your own shit, and you can own the game, and if you don't own the hardware, it doesn't matter
Oh,
because
interesting.
just just having the backup isn't illegal.
Right. It's not having the backup in New York State is not illegal, but you need to either have a receipt of purchase or a physical copy
Right.
of it on a different system.
Right. If I got rid of my Nintendo Switch, I would probably keep all of my Switch games just so I could download the ROMs and emulate them because it doesn't matter here if I dump them or not.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter where it came from as long as I'm not distributing ROMs.
That's the same way. So we just have differences in hardware here in New York then.
Yeah.
And I haven't kept up with the law in this regard. The last time I was checking up on these laws was when I was making my first emulation video back in the day. I think it was a how to fix Dolphin for Windows Vista
Yeah.
video. And I just wanted to real quick check my bases back then. So
So
things
we
might be
played
different.
so we played Silent Hill Downpour. I
Hmm.
don't have a PlayStation 3, but I have a copy of Silent Hill Downpour for the PlayStation 3.
Right.
So I'm gonna play that shit if I fucking want to, and it doesn't matter if I have the hardware it was made for or not. I own the game with the license to the game. That's the bottom line. It doesn't even matter how the copy of it got onto my PC.
Yeah, that's how it is in New York as well. So if I go to Vim, I can download it from Vim's as long as I own the copy or have a receipt of purchase. And
Right.
with RCPCS3, it is not running a PS3. It's not running anything from Sony other than a legally obtainable software that you can download from Sony's website, making the emulator 100% legal in New York State.
I've never been mailed an ISP letter about downloading backups of games that I own. And if I did, I have the contingency of just sending a photograph, a physical photograph back in the mail of the game that I own next to a copy of my photo ID to prove that it is me, in fact, who owns that game.
Right.
And problem solved.
And this is why I make so many emulation videos, is because I feel like so many people have like this jaded perspective of what emulation actually is or the laws behind emulation without actually having any understanding of how the laws actually function and how you're protected as a consumer.
Right. They're very loose in
Hmm.
terms of the contracts written ambiguously benefit the consumer.
I mean, just recently, wasn't there like a huge takedown in Australia for Nintendo content?
Right.
And in the States, that would not fly. That would not fly. No way. And wasn't a kid also? Well, that was distribution, but a kid in Australia, I think, was also arrested for distribution of a Mario Kart ROM or something like that.
Right.
And in the States, you're completely protected. I mean, if you are hosting it for download
The
and then you're just like, no, it's not for other people to download. This is my backup, then you're fine.
when the guys who stripped a lot of the bloat out of Windows 10 released that patch for that, they also released an ISO Windows 10, which is what ultimately got that project taken down. Like if they had left the ISO away from the page, it probably would have been much more long lasting and much more protected.
Like a source your own ISO, but here's the program to strip all the bloat out.
Right.
Right.
And that wouldn't have been a problem, but they distributed the ISO, so that kind of fucked everything.
Right. Yeah, emulation is this like weird gray zone with a lot of people who don't fully grasp the laws. And I hope that, with our content and our conversation on
I
emulation, we can protect people better.
I have been emulating games since I was 7 fucking years old.
Hmm.
Okay. In reality, if you were to charge me with, if emulating games were a crime and you were to charge me with emulating games over the entire course of my lifetime, I would serve thousands of life sentences.
Same. I have a whole hard drive just dedicated to and I work with emulation, companies, teams. I go through and I help organize some of the files. I do ray trace work. I do all kinds of stuff to help them figure out what's working, what's not working. I'll get ISOs and I'll see if it's crashing, where it's crashing. I'll timestamp
I
it and
kind of
send it in.
I kind of push the limits of what I can consider an owned license, right? Because most of the time I'll own the booklet that gives you the license to a game without actually having the disc or the data files, but I have the license in my hands.
Right.
So I can still technically download a backup of the game and have it be legal, but that's super questionable at best.
I somewhat disagree because if we were to play, say, Need for Speed Carbon on the show, and I wanted to play a PC version, and I wanted to quote unquote pirate it, right? Now, we're not talking about ROMs, we're talking about piracy now. Need for Speed Carbon came on 6 discs. Say I'm missing disc 4, and I go pirate an ISO of disc 4 Need for Speed Carbon. Did I break the law, or did I download a backup of a game that I definitely own, and I'm doing what I have to do to play it?
You downloaded a backup of a game that you definitely own and you're doing what you have to do to play it. But I mean, like, I'm talking about, like, I have a few Sims expansion packs with their CD keys, the license on the booklet, and no disc. You know, I have case, I have booklet, I have all of
I
the
think
shit. I
it's the
have no
same
disc,
thing.
and I own the license. As far as I'm concerned, the license in the booklet that states that that is the license for the game makes that the fucking license. All of my copies of the Sims 3 stuff that I have on disc next to those and the original copy of the Sims 3 game outweigh the license for that DLC. So as long as I have that there, it really doesn't fucking matter where I get it from.
I completely agree. I mean, I don't see much of a difference in what we just said. In my world, what we said is
It's
essentially the
versus
same.
it's having one disc, it's having just one disc missing out of a set versus having not having the disc at all.
I still think it's the same thing.
Versus like not having any of the data files, you know, you have
Hmm.
some of them.
If I had, let's say I went to GameStop and I was like, oh, I want to play Crackdown for the Xbox 360. And I went and I bought Crackdown and I put it in my Xbox 360 and the disc is all scratched to hell and it doesn't work. And I don't want to drive all the way back to GameStop to get a new disc. So instead, I load up Xenia and I download Crackdown. I'm not doing anything wrong.
No, but it becomes questionable if you were to take that disc, snap it in half, and then keep the case and put the case back on your shelf with the licensing booklet.
What if I have the receipt?
That's just it, right? As long as you have the receipt or the license booklet, it's legal. It's just morally questionable whether or not you actually own it or not.
I would
Because the
say
data
you do.
files in that instance are gone. You do, right? Legally, you do.
Hmm.
That's why I said it's morally questionable.
Right.
But that's just me. I don't pirate games. You know me. I'm super anti-piracy for the most part. Like, I don't pirate games. I haven't pirated games in years. Most games that I did pirate, I went back and bought after the fact, very quickly after the fact, or went back and bought because I pirated them when I was a little edgy teenager.
I'm the exact opposite, and I'll be completely honest. I pirate all the time. But here's
I
the
haven't
thing.
pirated much of anything late
Now,
at like
I want your opinion. I want the audience's opinion. Okay. When I pirate something, it's just a game that I'm curious about. I will pirate it, put it on my computer, and when I get around to it, I'll play it. If I end up enjoying that game, I will purchase it. If I do not enjoy that game, I will simply delete it. I have never played a game that I pirated and not purchased it. Am I in the wrong?
no, because you've gone back, you've made the purchase. Like, it doesn't really matter whether or not you
You
purchased it after the fact or before the fact. You enjoyed the game and made the purchase, and both of those events happened.
you've seen my Steam library.
Right.
Like 3,000 games is a lot of games. Those are all bought. Like,
Yeah.
and there are people who will say that what I am doing is wrong. I don't like blind consumerism. I don't want to go buy something. It's just to find out I don't like it. What if it's an
Meanwhile,
RPG?
I'm not a blind consumer. I just love Capcom enough to buy Resident Evil 4 on every
I
single platform it's ever come out for, along
knew it
with the
was
rest of the
coming.
series. So,
This is a very, I mean, yes, you're right. It's a very moral gray situation, but I think it's important, especially for a video like this. What if somebody only wants their PC to run PS2 games? Okay, run a Gen 3, CPU, grab a 1030, GDDR6, and it should run a PS2 just fine.
Right.
Just
You can there are super cheap disk drives. If you're like me and you're kind of anti-piracy focused, you can actually buy physical PS2 games, get a disk drive, and play them in PCSX2 through a disk drive. So fuck having a PlayStation 2. I mean, you don't even need it. It
right, exactly.
For your physical games, you don't even need it. You don't need to go through the hassle of backing up games and shit, even if that's not your stick. You can just put a game in the disk drive, boot from disk drive. It's amazing how far we've come.
I have streamed games through PCX2 using my disk drive. I have a USB disk drive, and I have straight up played games on my show through an emulator using my physical discs. That is
I
a thing
found
I've
that
done.
some games run better in PCSX2 when they have disk speed control.
I agree. So have I. I've actually found that some games that run like garbage in PCXX2 with the disc run smooth as butter.
Yeah. Like Dirge of Cerberus running an ISO file, really bad.
Yes.
Running the disk, really good. Like the contrast is night and day. 12 to 60 frames a second, night and day.
I guess the moral of what we're trying to say is, again, tailor your experience to your expectations. And when it comes to what you want to do, just understand the laws and the legality behind some of it. Like emulations, some states are very strict. I think, is it Utah? Utah is like super strict. Their
Right.
ISPs like crack down super hard. I might be wrong. If I'm not 100% positive because I don't really exit New York state
I
law,
I have
obviously.
no clue. We live in the 21st the 20s in the 21st century. Like if you still give a shit about people downloading stuff on the internet, what the hell is the problem with you?
Well, yeah.
It's like downloading songs in the 90s, literally an unwinnable war. What the hell is the problem with you? You're trying to fight a battle that absolutely cannot be won.
Yeah, that's why you got to do something like Spotify. Make it more convenient for the end user.
Right.
And in
I
my
don't believe in
world,
content theft. I don't believe in content theft, but I do believe there's a way to give to the creators of content and also not fucking strip the general public of their rights.
well, isn't this like the whole thing like was it Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, the fan remake? They're like, we are not accepting money for our game, but we are accepting donations, not for the game, but to have us take
As the
time off from
studio,
work.
they are accepting donations, which is
Yes.
fine. It has nothing to, I mean, being the studio, does it benefit the game? Sure. Are they profiting directly from the game? Who's to say? Because it doesn't matter. That's not what they're asking for. They're asking for them as a studio.
Hmm. So it's like that again, it's like that legal gray. And we deal with it literally all the time. Literally every day. But you
Yeah.
don't think about it. And then when somebody brings up emulators, oh, you should do that. It's like, well, hang on.
I think the ultimate moral of the story is computers are good, video games are fun. You can do this yourself. Don't be a shithead about copyright.
Yeah, pretty much. And subscribe.
Yeah. Subscribe, hit the bell icon a second time, and switch it over to all because then you'll get notified about every upload instead of just ones that YouTube thinks you might want to watch.
Which could be this one. This might be your
Yeah.
first video. So go subscribe to Red as well, who's doing cool indie content.
Yeah, if you want to do that. But like this one and subscribe to this one.
My growth has been great. I want to thank everybody so much. In the course of 2 weeks, I went from not growing in subscribers, being stuck at 332 subscribers for over a year, to now reaching 340 active viewers. People are returning to the channel, they're watching the content, and I can't thank you guys enough. Bless your hearts. I mean, it makes me so happy to see.
Big up everybody because this is fun. It's fun thing for us to get together here, have these conversations, play the games we do. Like it keeps everybody kind of. I hope we're entertaining to you, the public.
I'm sure we are. I mean, they wouldn't come back if we weren't, right?
I think I'm just kind of a spaz, but that's just me.
Isn't that like a part of the fun though?
Yeah, it's all in good fun. When Red says something fucking crazy once in a while, just remember
Hey,
it's all a part of the fun.
I'm not perfect. I say crazy shit. I bring up Silent Hill in every episode.
There he fucking goes talking about Silent Hill again.
Go
Couldn't
subscribe
go
to Red.
one episode without it.
You know I had to.
Yeah, it was coming. It was gonna be done.
But what are we doing next? We have been so busy. We haven't been able to sit down. We haven't been able to talk about the future. We keep making promises. We keep falling short. What are we
I'm
doing?
still gonna do Anna.
You're still
That
doing
is
Anna.
yeah, it is still on my list of things to do. Um, Depends on what you want to do. I was thinking like games that I've been playing lately are like if you wanted to talk about something that I've done, Kingdom Hearts. That's easy enough to get through. I'm sure you could run through the first Kingdom Hearts in a few hours.
Oof, I don't know. I'm not very good at Kingdom Hearts, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I'm kind of trash at it.
Wow, that is surprising.
341 subs. Wow, thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Could race it. Still got to do that.
You
There's a
cut
lot of
off.
stuff that we could do. I said we could race in Resident Evil 4.
Oh,
Still that available yet.
yeah,
A lot
let
of
us
stuff we
know. If you made it this far, go down below, comment. Should we wait until Resident Evil 4 Remake or race Resident Evil 4 as it is? I
And
want
you
to
know
know.
what? Suggest a game that we could talk about. Doesn't have to be multiplayer, doesn't have to be single player, just has to be a game. We'll play a lot.
I want.
I mean we both have a lot.
I really want you to play Solar Ash.
You big up that game for a minute now.
Dude, so good. I really, really want to talk about Solar Ash. I don't know if you'll like it, but bro, I loved it.
I've got some warped and changed perspective on Final Fantasy 15.
Oh no, interesting.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 15 content?
Maybe.
Find out in the next episode of Omnia Obscurium.
Wow.
Goodbye, everybody.